Okay, now I've really been enjoying listening to your guys' discussion board for this week and hearing about different problems that you've had. And I think there's a number of things you guys are talking about, and I'm glad that the videos are helping. Some of you have remarked about that. But I do want to at least quickly go over the traditional standpoint or the traditional score of opposition one more time, just to give you a sense of it, because I think really that's one of the harder aspects of doing the categorical propositions. So let me throw it up on the board and we'll kind of see how it works. Right? So remember, we have our A, our E, our I, and our O, right? These are contradictories. I'll just put contra here, right? These are our contras, right? Right? We also have up here, this is our contrary relationship, oops. Right? This is our subcontrary relation. Right? And then we had this is the subalternation. And I'm going to put one arrow going down and one arrow going up. This is subaltern, or subalternation, right? And it stands the same for both cases, right? Yeah. Okay, now just to remind you, the contradictory means that it has the opposite truth value. Here, let me get this a little bit better for you. Right? It means it has the opposite truth value. Contrary, right, means that at least one is false, but they're not both true. Right? So one of these guys has to be false, and they can't both be true. They could possibly both be false, though, right? That's the idea. And the bottom one, they can't both be false. So one of them's got to be true, but it is possible that they're both true, right? And truth flows downward, and falsity flows upward, right? So let's see if we can take an example in which we could test an immediate inference, right? So let's take this example. It says, it is false that all A or B, right? So what we have here, when we say all A or B, let's say we have false up here, right? Basically what you do is you put your truth value and you try to compute it, right? If this is false, then what does that tell us, right? Now let's remember our relationships. False, only truth goes down, so we don't know that this is false, right? We know that this is false, that this has to be true, right? Remember, truth doesn't go up, only falsity, so that doesn't tell us anything, right? And then if you remember the contrary, right, at least one of them's false, and they're not both true, so we don't know whether or not this is false, right? And corollary, we don't know. And then the subcontrary, right, at least one is true, but they're not both false. This could be true. So this is essentially all we can use to conclude there. We just use the contradictory relationship. So if someone says that an A proposition is false, right, and then they conclude, therefore, no A or B, right, as it were, it's false that all A or B, therefore there's no A or B, right, saying that this one's true, right, we actually cannot conclude this, right? So I hope you can see why we can't conclude it. Is because the contrary relationship, it's possible that it's true, but just if this is false, that doesn't tell us, right? So let's take another example here, right? Let's erase our truth values, right? Let's say that we have an all A or B statement which is true, right? So if this is true, because of subalternation, then we know that this one is also going to be true, right? And if this is true, then we know this one's false, right? Because this is the contradictory relationship. So the question is the O proposition true, right? So remind yourself that the subcontrary relationship states that at least one of them is true, but they're not both false, right? So ultimately, in this case, right, we can't actually conclude it, right? Oh, actually, I'm wrong. We can, right? Because if this is true, then this has to be false, right? Oopsie, I even made a mistake. We all make mistakes, right? So this is how we can do it. Let's try a different one, right? So let's say that this is false, right? It is false that some A or B. What can we conclude from here? Well, if this is false, then this has to be true, right? If this is true, then this has to be what? True, because truth flows downward. And if this is true, that means this has to be false. And of course, we see falsity flows upward, right? So let's try a different one. So I hope you can see how once you get a handle of these relationships, you can really start to move quickly in order to determine whether or not The corollary propositions that use those same terms would also be true or false, right? But it's not going to work every time, right? And certainly the hardest one to remember is the contrary and the subcontrary relationships, right? Those are the ones you have to memorize. And always start with the contradictories and see if you can, calculate it accordingly, right? So let's try a different one. Let's say this is false. What does that tell us, right? Well, if this is false, the contradictory there would be that it's true, right? But of course, truth doesn't flow upward, right? So the equation in falsity doesn't flow downward, right? So can we come to a conclusion about whether the A or the O proposition is true or false? How are we going to do it? Think about it, right? Let me remind you, the contrary relationship is that at least one of them is false, right? But they're not both true. So this is false, but we don't know. They could both be false, right? And then what about the subcontrary relationship, which is at least one of them's true, right? And here we have one's true, and that they're not both false. So they can't both be false, and one's true, so we ultimately don't know. So you can see here that our A and our O, right, is undetermined, right? So if someone says it's false that no A or B, we can conclude, oh, that must mean that there actually are some A or B, but that's it. We're kind of stuck from there, right? So the traditional square of opposition definitely gives us a leg up compared to the modern square of opposition, but it can't do everything for us, right? And so that's essentially how you can use the traditional square of opposition as really a means to calculate the truth value of different propositions. Okay? So I hope that helps to clarify some things. There was another comment, someone said the hardest thing for them was the terminology. Well, certainly, that is the hardest part, but I don't know what to say to you except that it's just practice, 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 and getting used to it. But I hope that you'll get a sense that even though the terms may be unfamiliar, the ideas aren't actually that radical, right? And if we just go slowly, we'll come to an understanding of it. So keep your comments going, and remember, keep your questions, okay? Good work, guys. Bye.